Mhm.
You ready, Zachary?
Yep, I am ready. Um,
I think it is it 6:30 yet? I think
yep,
it is.
it's 6:30.
Okay, we'll start. Welcome everybody to the March Zoning and Development Committee meeting. And before we get started, Zachary will explain how it works.
Good evening, everybody. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout the meetings except for the committee co-chairs and the presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon, pressing raise hand, not the wave or thumbs up buttons. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you are on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you have an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participant section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chatmate, I'm here for support. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zachary. And the first item on the agenda is something that we've been working on for many years, and now we're getting very close to getting our toe in the door, which is the Yorkville and Lenox Hill special zoning districts. And we're lucky to have Tuck Edelstein, who is the planner and architect who has been working on it, and he will bring us up to date. Hi, Tuck?
Tuck, if you're there, you could unmute.
Now I can unmute. I can be heard.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So I'm going to give a little talk, but I think mostly this is about question and answer, and mostly about where we go from here. But so I'll keep my remarks brief. But as conditions regarding the zoning and development on Lenox Hill and Yorkville have been the subject of much discussion over the years, and certainly currently in response to the community board putting forth a comprehensive set of proposals grouped together, known as the special districts, to guide the development in times to come. So as I say, this evening I won't go through a long presentation about the background, as we're now in a position to move forward with city planning on these proposals. Thus, I'll make a few brief contextual remarks and we'll open the floor to questions. Again, as I say, mostly about where we go from here. So the application, and forgive me, it might be very familiar territory to a lot of folks. I'll keep it kind of broad and summary in its character. Also, I'm not sure who, if any, has read the application text that we developed, and so that actually provides a lot of background as well, and much more depth than what I'm going to speak to tonight. But in short, this application is being proposed because the very character of Lenox Hill and Yorkville are under significant threat due to out of control development. Studies have shown much of this area is not built to capacity. In fact, the majority of block fronts still contain only buildings lower than 210 feet. And consequently, the avenues are under great pressure. Many projects are currently built, planned, or in construction with heights far greater than the 210-foot limit that prevails elsewhere on the Upper East Side. Given contemporary development strategies, combined with technical advances in engineering and construction, and what's really basically an unlimited global funding base, building heights have skyrocketed. The community is facing unprecedented new larger buildings, and it distorts the intent of the zoning controls, places great pressure on existing community fabric. All expectations are that, barring some creative intersection, these pressures will continue to increase. As a result of such pressures, Lenox Hill and Yorkville neighborhoods specifically face three interrelated problems: the lack of an overall building height limits, enabling the creation of tall and super tall buildings out of scale with the character and size of their surrounding communities. And just for interest's sake, you know, super tall actually has a real definition as well as a kind of colloquial interpretation. But they are defined as buildings over 300 meters tall, which is about 980 feet. So that's what's meant by super tall. There's also very tall, which isn't as quite precise a term, but there's a wide range between 210 feet and super tall. And we're experiencing more and more of all of those. So in any case, that's a point of information. So the three interrelated problems, as I mentioned, are lack of overall building height limits, which enable tall and super tall buildings. There's a loss of existing tenements and consequently a loss of their associated rent-regulated affordable housing. Third is the loss of local, mom and pop, small-scale retail and associated neighborhood services and character. So it's important to note that the development problems we're addressing in Yorkville and Lenox Hill are chiefly a question of avenue control, specifically concerning Third Avenue, Second Avenue, First Avenue, and Yorkville. These issues are distinct to the Lenox Hill and Yorkville neighborhoods, and they're separate from the larger Upper East Side. The proposed special district actions reflect the community's interest in allowing predictable, reasonable growth while providing similar height limits as elsewhere in the Upper East Side and surrounding communities, while maintaining the long-established character of Lenox Hill and Yorkville. In fact, two things are evident. Because of relatively appropriate controls, development in the surrounding communities is by and large effectively managed. That is on Upper East Side from Fifth Avenue Lenox to Lexington. Also the East Harlem community with its consequently revamped zoning controls and special overlay districts and so forth. But the other thing that's evident is as a result of these conditions, Lenox Hill and Yorkville are virtually surrounded on each side by communities with already enacted zoning controls that are much more tailored and thereby more appropriate to those communities' needs and character. And so that leaves Lenox Hill and Yorkville largely unregulated in terms of their realistic needs in today's and tomorrow's world. And these two communities thus stand out really as targets for out-of-scale developments, in contrast to the areas around them. Such developments will not benefit Lenox Hill and Yorkville communities at large, and thus are not reflective of the community's needs. So I want to take a step back for a definition. As expressed in the New York City Zoning Code, special districts customize zoning requirements and incentives to fit distinctive qualities of a specific neighborhood. They may embody specific rules that may not lend themselves to generalized zoning and standard development. Special districts are often broadly aimed at preserving and enhancing a neighborhood's character. So the proposed action described in this application is seeking the creation of such special districts in Lenox Hill and Yorkville to revise the development standards along 3rd, 2nd, 1st, and York Avenues. The objective is to provide predictability for new development in accordance with the intent of the zoning code and to strengthen character of the community in terms of its scale, its density, its affordable housing, and its retail features. These areas are proposed to be known as the Lenox Hill Special District and the Yorkville Special District. This action will accomplish 3 broad objectives along these avenues. Number 1, it will limit building heights to the well-established standard of 210 feet, with a maximum base height of 85 feet before setbacks, while retaining the current buildable FAR 10/FAR 12, including affordable housing bonus density standards. 2, the intent is to preserve existing tenements along the avenues and their associated affordable housing by preserving explicitly old law and new law tenements. And 3, the intent is to support smaller scale local businesses in accordance with the City Council's plan for retail diversity. So overall, the initiative is in response to growing pressure of out-of-scale development in Lenox Hill and Yorkville communities. These two communities seeing unprecedented new building heights, it's distorting the intent of the zoning controls and creating great pressure on existing community fabric. Present practices clearly aren't sustainable, and unaddressed, such pressures will only grow. In the face of such rampant, inappropriate transformation, the establishment of these special districts will allow Lenox Hill and Yorkville to calm the situation down. As a development question, however, it's important to note that while still allowing reasonable development, limiting building heights, such as we're describing, as well as other provisions, will not reduce developable area, which is also known as density, as measured by FAR. So they regulate the building's form and shape and height, obviously, but not their overall development area. That will remain the same as it currently is. So the creation of these special districts will provide predictability. And as a strategy, they are tightly focused, economically sound, and broadly popular. These proposals present a realistic tool to address current and future problems. It will strengthen the community's scale and development patterns. They'll strengthen affordable housing preservation, and they'll strengthen their retail features. While the special districts will discourage demolition of traditional buildings that contribute to the character of the urban fabric, they will encourage development in scale with the existing community, allowing reasonable, predictable growth. And they will thereby serve to enhance the city's tax base consistent with these values. The issues presented by a building's height and massing, by tenement protection and retail support are very interrelated. They work in coordination with each other. Addressing them together will aid the adoption of each. They're about more than just building heights. In fact, they're more than their individual component parts. They're each integral parts of the three-legged stool, if you will, and as such, they stand together. They affect all aspects of the community, from transportation and infrastructure to the tax base and even energy usage. And interestingly enough, amongst other impacts, it's been shown that energy consumption rises exponentially with a building height. There's many other aspects of that as well. The development of these special districts is a direct response to public pressure. Given the increasing pace of out-of-scale development on the Upper East Side, focused most strongly on the Lenox Hill and Yorkville communities in particular, timely enactment of these proposals is becoming urgent. There's a groundswell of concern to address needs of these neighborhoods in a way that will support vibrant, thriving community of predictability and benefit for all. In Lenox Hill and Yorkville, it's essential that reasonable development standards in accordance with our contemporary and likely future world be enacted now. Thank you. So,
thank you, Tuck. You are almost able to, with this final draft, you're almost able to file with the City Planning Commission.
That's correct. Yep. We have a bit of boilerplate and so forth to cover, just basically put together, and then we're ready to file it. We've had initial meetings with DCP, Department of City Planning, and so they're expecting it actually at this point. Tony Lachuga
Very good.
Direct contact for us there, and he's familiar with this. Yeah, it's exciting actually. I mean, it's a lot of work and it's been a lot of time, and it reflects a lot of collaborative effort on so many people's parts. So it's an exciting thing. There's a long process. I could speak to the process from this point forward. This is one step of many, but one foot in front of the next. Obviously, there's a lot of pieces, but I think part of the intention in this writing and the effort in general is to, well, clearly we build consensus, but also to build energy and to underscore the imperative to enact reasonable controls. And it's quite striking when you realize that, as I mentioned in my talk here, all the communities around Lenox Hill and Yorkville have height controls and different regulations on the development, the character developments. Even, bordering Lenox Hill to the south is Midtown East, clearly a completely different neighborhood in terms of occupancy, business, and residential focus. But it too has development standards appropriate to that area. It's clearly a different area. The western avenues of Upper East Side, 5th through Lexington, and now even East Harlem as well, all have regulations that Yorkville and Lenox Hill are lacking. So it really sits in the crosshairs of great development pressures. That's the motivation.
Thank you. And now we'll go to first the public. Let's see if we have any members of the public with their paws up. Yes, Judith Schneider is the first, I think.
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. Could you please explain to me, because I'm not very familiar with this process. You said you're almost ready for your presentation to landmarks. What is the process, sorry, not landmark, city planning. What is the process and what are the steps to go through to accomplish this rezoning?
Okay. Well, it's not a presentation to them, it's an application, really. I mean,
Application.
but there are a number of steps. And so to clarify that, we've had initial meetings with them, but this is formally known as a pre-application submittal. And what happens from here is, this is in response to forms and follow-up questions that they've posed. So what happens from there is a process. Upon receipt of the pre-application, which is what we're referring to as being just about ready to go, the city will, within the Department of City Planning, they'll analyze the materials, they'll consider all the stipulations, and they'll assemble a panel call and then hold what are known as interdivisional meetings, interdivisional meetings, but they are in fact interdepartmental meetings too. All these related professionals from the disciplines that this initiative addresses will meet together and will determine more fully the impacts of the proposal, the scope of questions presented by it, what needs to be looked at more fully, and where we would go from there. Following that, there's a number of different kinds of more formal studies. There's what's known as a reasonable worst case development scenario, where one of the kinds of analysis you have to do is consider if this proposal was enacted, what's the worst thing that could happen, in a nutshell. There's also an environmental assessment statement. That's not an environmental impact statement. It's important to note it's a different thing. After all those materials are submitted, there's a decision made. I should mention these packages will run to hundreds and hundreds of pages. I mean, it's a substantial amount of work. And particularly given the focus of these special districts, that can happen with a single project, that kind of analysis and depth of work. We're impacting a couple hundred blocks of the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It's going to get a lot of attention and going to require a lot of documentation and analysis. Again, I come back to, which is why it's important that it be kind of well thought out and compelling, and that can carry it. It's the strength of a good idea. Anyhow, I digress. So after those documents are presented, the revised reasonable worst case development scenario and environmental assessment statement, there'll be a decision on the basis of the City Planning Commission about whether it needs to have an environmental impact statement written as well. The presumption is that it won't for this. And then there's various analyses and votes, but ultimately it then goes to the city then begins the ULURP planning process, where the city council considers the questions and ultimately the mayor will sign off on it. So in a nutshell, in thumbnail, that's what the process is. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And next we have Stephanie Reckler.
Tuck, your document is reflective of so much work and so comprehensive and also so easy to read. Two questions. I was surprised that you didn't include anything on page 2 about climate change. The issues of climate change are so important and so important to height limits. And so perhaps you want to include a fourth issue on page 2. And the other question I have on page 3, where you say under point 1 on page 3, including the affordable housing bonus. What is that?
Okay, well, first of all, in response to your questions, I think everything having to do with climate issues are just completely fundamental. That said, and I did address more than lip service. I mean, I did address that there was the dimensions to very tall buildings that have climate impacts when it just said it's been shown that they're very energy inefficient. There's a limit to how much detail I want to put in this, believe it or not. And there's lots of time in opportunity in times to come to add more. Not for any reasons of not supporting everything we can do. I think it's questionable whether at this juncture we should hold up this effort as kind of a singular effort at imposing climate controls through the zoning regulations. You could say, well, other places have similar building regulations as we're proposing, and that's true, and I'm hinging an important part of the argument about that. But they're not doing it as a green initiative particularly. And the rationale and the body of thought and the applications of those development standards citywide are not, from a zoning perspective, really dependent on green kinds of issues. So I think we can get, and I would be glad to get more into that in times to come. I think there's other issues to foreground this initial level of the application. I mean, as I said, I did make mention of it. I'll see if we can say something more, but to put it on the same level as the other 3 points, I think overplays it, frankly, at this point in time, in all honesty. But that doesn't seem, I'm not mindful of it, and we'll look for opportunities to incorporate those things too. And any good argument is welcome, and so I welcome your thoughts in terms of that, and we'll see how we can bring that forward more in times to come. As far as what is the FAR 10, FAR 12? FAR is a measure of density, building density, of development density, and it's a multiple of a building. It's the fundamental designation for how much of building, how much square footage one can build on a given site. And so there's a lot of things about that, but the basic density regulation on the Lenox Hill and Yorkville Avenue uses an FAR 10, a floor area ratio 10. The code in those places allows an extra 2 FAR. So in other words, a little bit more, 20% more developable area for affordable housing in those areas. So that's thereby 10 becomes 12. That's how that happens. I will cut from that to something else I referenced that's really pretty interesting as far as the affordable housing in the existing tenements, is that they actually have a lot, so buildings, new developments will say they're going to build affordable housing. Where they do it and how they do it and how it's regulated is a whole other question, but and thereby get an FAR2 bonus, and isn't that great? We're going to build it FAR2 fully affordable housing. Well, the fact is existing tenements have substantially more by floor area ratio housing than that FAR2 allowance affords them. Particularly, as I mentioned in the text, 5% to actually 75% more floor area in presumably mostly affordable housing in existing tenements. So I just think it's a very interesting thing to realize, and it's not talked about that much. But is that clear about FAR 10, FAR 12?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody?
Okie doke. The next person is Andrew Revershier.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. And also thank you, Mr. Edelstein, for this really helpful and great presentation. And I echo everyone's comments, commending you for your hard work and your great work. And as someone who's a peer-reviewed cellular researcher who focuses on climate change, I was so happy to hear you about talk about the exponential increase of energy as buildings go up, because for the last several years, I've been testifying in front of this board about the dangers of going above 10 floors, which is around 100 feet, and 210 floors, which is, or 21 floors, which is about 210 feet. And just echoing the previous caller who was talking about climate change with regard to this zoning proposal, it's really critical. And I'm not sure exactly if the bonus that you were talking about for affordable housing means that they can build up to 250 or to 300 if they include affordable housing, but there are studies that are showing more and more that above the 210 level, specifically in China and London, who are ahead of us on the overdevelopment curve, there is much more energy usage. The building materials that are needed in order to construct those taller towers require a lot of energy and resources. It contributes to the urban heat island effect, which makes the ground temperatures hotter. It actually worsens our air quality and our respiratory health, which is covered under zoning in the 14th Amendment. And so I was just wondering if you could just again clarify what the bonus means, if that allows for extra height with affordability, and if there is a way, because I've done a lot of research, and if you want me to send it over, I'm always glad to help. But the climate change stuff is really important because it stops us from going, well, what's the difference between 210 and 220? Well, if 220 is okay, how about 240? And really, what's the difference between 240 and 260?
Understood.
210. Anyway, it would provide a hard cap based on peer-reviewed data. I digress. Thank you.
Well, that's fine. First of all, Andrew, thank you so much for your comments, and I really welcome your insights in these questions, and perhaps we can collaborate more closely.
I'd love that.
Stuff. Yeah, I welcome it. And I understand, well, not to the extent that I'm sure you do, but I have quite a bit of familiarity with the question and belief in it, the validity of it. And just as a rule of thumb question, leaving aside building technologies and everything about building a building, short or tall, just as a basic question of morphology, if you have the taller the building is, the greater the percentage of exterior wall to floor area is. If you take the same amount of square footage and you build it, in a relatively, think of like a, traditional New York City 10-story apartment building, whatever. If you build that development in that kind of fashion, you'll have, I'm not going to propose a percentage because I don't know, but off the top of my head, but you'll have a certain percentage of floor area relative to exterior building that will be quite large. If you take that same amount of floor area, instead you build a tall building like that, the relation of the same amount of square foot floor area to the exterior that it takes to enclose that will be much, much greater. In other words, much more envelope exposure. So there's just an inherent efficiency merely based on geometry before you get to technology questions and anything about building tectonics that relate to energy usage and construction. So I think, that's kind of aside from deeper, more insightful building tectonic arguments, it's just the basic geometry for morphology kind of question. In any case, in response to your other query, well, there's two parts of that. A bonus is just allowing more floor area. And again, floor area is the major measure of building density or city's density or any density. That's how it's controlled. It's not controlled through height or massing or any other kind of question as a design criteria. It's controlled by floor area ratio. And so as floor area, and we see that, and as I mentioned in this write-up, the super tall buildings in Billionaires Row are built under FAR 10 zoning envelopes. And that underscores actually what I was saying before. You can build a very, very tall building still within that floor area ratio, and you just have an extremely much larger exterior wall to floor ratio. In any case, I'm getting divergent. We're not proposing to change the floor area ratio. And that's a developer's bread and butter in a lot of ways too. That's basic expression of the value of a piece of land. And these proposals allow, so floor area ratios are established. I mean, they're part of the zoning code and they're part of the economic picture of development and land valuation. We're not proposing to change that at all. Where that area is built in a given site is regulated differently. So why 210 feet? 210 feet is very well established. First of all, it creates an awfully tall building. You can build a 20-story building basically within FAR 12. regulations. But that's a judgment, and that's perhaps in this context not for me to make. But more importantly, there are community standards, and there's practices, and there's character, and there's history, and there's precedent, and there's all kinds of reasons why one criteria might be established rather than another. Recognize the fact that we need to pick, or we should pick something, which actually is giving rise to this whole thing, because only on these avenues in Lenox Hill and Yorkville are there not height limits. They stand alone in that kind of unbelievable situation. In any case, 210 feet is a real standard in the city. It's a standard on the western part of the Upper East Side, which isn't even quite typically built to that elevation anyhow. And it has a long precedence and contextual relationship, and long-standing and well-established and well-accepted standards really throughout the city in a lot of different contexts.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to working with you to getting this absolute 210 height cap done.
Yes, well, thank you. In relation to that and to Ms. Rickler's comments before, I will keep in mind how we can incorporate these ideas more explicitly. So, great.
Thank you. Now, next, let me see, Leah Hanlon, and what we're trying to do is just get ourselves filed with this, which is, we're not going to, I hope, suggest changes to this. It will doubtless be changed as we go through the process. And a great many of the things that people have said are good arguments for it and will be very useful. So as we go ahead, the next speaker is Leah Hanlon.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a great presentation. Two questions.
Mhm.
First, assuming we are successful, how long do you think this process would take from now until the height limit goes into effect? And second, what kind of opposition do you expect we would encounter? At what stages and from whom?
Great questions. It's a long process, and I hesitate to put a time figure on it, because we have to coordinate with city processes, with city government, and so that could go faster or it could go slower. It's some years, though. It's not. This is a big plan, and this is going to affect a lot of people. So it's going to get a lot of scrutiny, and then it goes to the city council, and you can be sure the city council is going to pay a lot of attention to it, and the press will pay a lot of attention to it at that level. Before it even gets that far, it kind of addresses your other question. There'll be a lot of opposition. I think that's to be expected. I think, primarily from the development community, because it's going to limit building characteristics. And I choose that word carefully because it's not going to limit building developable area, but it will limit building height. And tall buildings are a major high-end tendency. They're very expensive, and they're very sought after. So I think the development community is going to have a lot to say about it. Let's put it that way. The other issue is about our timing, and I think we're going to together have to figure out how to fund this effort. And I'll just put that out there in public, and I'm sure the community board leadership will address this more directly. But there's a whole other group of professionals. I'm the central planner, and I'll be the ringmaster in a sense. But there's a lot of other allied professionals, environmental lawyers, other planners, various other kinds of analysts that will be part of this. And the cost of this will run into hundreds of thousands of dollars. And how quickly we're able to raise those funds to put it forward, and similarly, how much support and cooperation we can get directly from the city not only in terms of advocacy, but in terms of processing support, helping write and shape the proposals, will also make a big difference about timing and is critical to its success. Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. And now the next speaker is Jordan Press.
Hi, thank you. Jordan Press, Upper East Sider, read over the proposal. Regarding the affordable housing, the city has the mandatory inclusionary housing program, which I think only applies when you're adding floor area to a given area, which I don't think is what we're doing with this proposal. But I was wondering, just given the desperate need for affordable housing in our neighborhood and throughout the city, if you know of a way that we're able to overlay a requirement for affordable as part of any development within the special district.
Well, we have addressed affordable housing to the extent of its preservation. And there's such a loss of existing tenements, old law, new law tenements over time.
We could do so much better, though, if we also required anything new to include affordable.
Understood. And I recognize that that's one piece of a larger question. The decision was made not to separately with, like, how many things can we pile into this one proposal in a way? It's a big proposal, I know. But there's judgments about it, obviously. And so there's an implicit judgment that says we can do this and we can't do that. And, I recognize that as the underpinning your question, legitimately so. And I just want to return to the tenement preservation portion of that to say that it's significant, but it doesn't address the larger need. So there's nothing in the proposed. So it's one piece of a much bigger picture and a much more crying need. I don't think we can solve. Again, it's kind of related to the energy question. How much can we solve in terms of a citywide need with the zoning question in these two communities? And how much should we hinge a initiative that's very well founded and extremely necessary on a question that's a citywide question that isn't addressed by building density and building height limits? So I guess what I'm saying is, let's all do that, but I'm not sure we want to freight this proposal that much more with that big question of which applies so broadly. I know that might not be as satisfying an answer as you want, but I'm not sure how to approach it otherwise, frankly.
Okay. Well, my suggestion would be as we move forward, I think that would draw a lot more support if we could know that, like when our young people are looking for a place to live, that they'll be able to stay close to home.
All that it needs. Yeah. Well, I welcome your thoughts about it. It's, as you can imagine, and perhaps you've been part of these conversations, there's a lot of discussion about it. And this was this is the point we ended up at. There's a long process in this,
Understood.
At the beginning. And I welcome your further thoughts. I'm trying to lay out the political judgment, political economic judgment we face in trying to bring to these two communities kind of appropriate and necessary controls. Even the tenement preservation part is going to have a lot of contentious response. Now, the fact is there are such programs elsewhere in the city, in Little Italy and Clinton's particularly. There's an established precedence for these things, but there's going to be a lot of strong feelings about these things. So that's kind of where we ended up at this point in time with this effort.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. And the next person is Dylan Geronimo Kennedy.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
First, I just wanted to thank you There's clearly a lot of work and a lot of clarification and thought that went into the proposal. And I really like how you laid it out in both the text and to us right now. I know this is a little bit of a wrinkle here because I know we're not adjusting the floor area ratios, but it is reasonable to say that, even when there are those floor area ratios, oftentimes you don't have development at that level. You mentioned we don't have that right now. Is it fair to say that imposing these height limits would probably mean there are fewer houses on the Upper East Side in like 10 years or 5 years, or whatever timeline we want to do? Because even if you could potentially build the same number, it is less likely that development will happen given the height limits. Is that fair, or am I misunderstanding?
I don't think it's going to be an impediment to development. I think and it's not just opinion. I mean, I think I can bring a lot of analysis to that. But the question is, what it'll be an impediment to is high-end development, is super expensive development. I think it's pretty clear there'll be less of that because, as we can see, all these very tall buildings attract very high prices, and
Yes.
and there are many, after I don't know, after 60 or 70 stories in height, they become magnets for people to invest in. It's a way that the international investment community stores money. These apartments, these 20 million, 50 million, $80 million apartments. That doesn't produce housing. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even really produce residents. This might be one of many houses for those few people. There will not be, what this proposal will do is encourage the creation of a broad-based community with a lot of breadth of activity and population that is appealing to a much broader section of the population. I think in the face of that, people aren't, you're not getting people coming in and build new buildings to say, I'm going to only build a 12-story building because I just don't feel like building anymore, even though I own property that allow me to build an 18-story building. That's not going to happen for the most part. And if there's the economics to build more housing, albeit not subsidized of some sort or cost proscribed, they're going to build that. I think.
Right. So there might be situations where, because they can no longer build, I think you said 18 and 12, there might be circumstances where, since they can't build 18, they might not bother to build 12, or if they build 12, then you're missing 6 floors of living.
No. This allows those kind of buildings. An FAR 12 building can be built within 210 feet. So that applies to any lot, any property, except ones that are otherwise constrained, if they're in landmarks districts, or if they're in height districts, or if they're, tenement preservation or some other thing. But any basic building lot can be built to the allowable density.
But they often are not, right?
I don't think that's true. I think they often are.
Oh, sorry. I thought I misunderstood your points earlier, which is that even if right now the neighborhood could be built very tall under current existing rules, it's not.
Well, no. Tall is different from density. Tall is different.
Okay.
From
Yes, that. Yep, understand that.
And so now they might be built very tall, but they're still going to have the same FAR.
Okay, so your contention with this throughout is that it will be the same number of houses built or apartments built, just that they will be shorter. Okay, I appreciate your feedback.
Whether they're 4-bedroom apartments or studio apartments, the square footage devoted towards construction, mostly residential, this doesn't impact that. There are other economic questions that do, but most, if not just about all, new construction will take advantage of the development potential to get whether a small site or a large site.
And I appreciate responses. My kind of big concern is that I am very recently moved into this neighborhood. I moved in at a time where, due to the pandemic, there were a lot more houses, many of which were or apartments which were empty. And so there was kind of an imbalance between those two. And so I'm just worried if there are a lot more people coming in, but not much more housing if my rent is going to skyrocket and I won't be able to stay here. So that's kind of the framework I'm working with, but I appreciate you saying it's going to be the same. Thank you very much. I apologize for taking so much time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One thing I just want to mention as we talk about more housing is that we're in the most congested area probably in the country. So a lot of people want to move to New York, and I'm perfectly happy, but they can't all move up here. And the next, let's wind this up a little bit. We haven't got to the board yet. So the next speaker is Boaz Galil.
Hello. I like tall buildings. I like skyscrapers. This is why I came to New York. I think that if you limit the height of the buildings, eventually it will reduce the number of available apartments in the future, because any regulation that you set today will impact years and years in the future. And for Elizabeth, so you are right, not everyone can come to the neighborhood, but not everyone needs to stay in the neighborhood as well. That's my comment to you. But thank you.
Well, I appreciate your comment. I would suggest that I like tall buildings too, but I don't like them everywhere. And I don't think they're appropriate everywhere. And that's why we have zoning in general, because we kind of identify places that are really suitable for tall buildings and other places that aren't. And, you know, obviously New York became known in the planet, in the world, for tall buildings. I mean, obviously many other places do now as well, but it's a hallmark of so much of the spirit of New York in this country. That said, though, it doesn't mean they want to be in every neighborhood. It doesn't mean we should just allow them wherever they are, or that kind of isn't what about the foundations of zoning and the ideas behind it are. On the other hand, like tall buildings in Midtown, now I'm expressing my personal opinion, but it's kind of writ large in the building structure. It's great. Build all the tall buildings you want. I mean, within limits of other kinds of considerations. But, you know, it's a question of where, it's not if. And this isn't such a great location to just have super tall buildings. It ravishes the neighborhood. It'll destroy the neighborhood, really destroy the neighborhood character. It'll destroy the neighborhood's economics, its infrastructure, all the reasons, or at least, I don't know, some of the reasons perhaps that you were attracted to it. And I know important reasons why other people are attracted to it. Tall buildings are not helpful for this kind of neighborhood. They are elsewhere. So that's the sense behind this.
Thank you. Now the next speaker is Gloria Winograd.
Yes, thank you. I have not been much part of this discussion, but I have lived here and I grew up here. And I will say that I have been concerned since I was a young child about the ever reduction in the mixed nature of our neighborhoods. When I was in high school, there was a man coming to our Vietnam War protests warning us that there was a master plan to change New York City from the cultural capital of the world, which it then was, to the financial capital of the world, which it has now become. Our skyline has been desecrated by egregious things that are eclipsing the Empire State Building. We are not Shanghai. We are New York City. We are a place where a mixed population of people from all over the planet come to live and work. And I must say that it is frightening because we are now selling this city by the cubic inch. And it has all become about money. Wall Street was always here. So
could you focus your comments on the proposal?
Yes, I commend the proposal, but since it is going to take, from what I have heard today, many years to accomplish, I would say that we need to think about a two-pronged approach here. We need to save our city. If this is going to take 2 years or several years, and I have heard at these meetings that once you see a billboard go up or a shovel in the ground, it's a done deal. We can't afford to wait. We should do this. It sounds great. And we should maybe think about not nitpicking so much and let it go forward and go through the process. But I think we should also be thinking about connecting with other processes that are going to have a greater and sooner impact. I'm sorry for digressing.
Okay, thank you.
Concern. Go ahead.
I think we'll just leave that one. It's very grateful for your comments. And now, John Saloni.
Can I just say one thing about that? We share your urgency, share your sense of urgency. It's not a casual question. It's changing every day. So we are trying to do it. There's not a lot of different solution paths. This is a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Tuck, for your presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for recognizing me, Elizabeth. A quick question, one simple question, Tuck.
Yes.
Let's separate, some of the math and the FAR and the specifications from what I would say would be, or let me rephrase it. Can you give the group a specific location, imagining that you had a vacant block or something close to it along 1st, 2nd, or 3rd Avenue in our district, and imagine what a building, what that block might look like. Can you point, for example, to a real block that you are aware of that might resemble what this zoning change would look like?
Yeah, I can do that. And that's, I'm sure, helpful to envision what we're talking about. 210 feet is not a small building. What it'll produce is not a small building. Most of the buildings along, the 5th Avenue, Park Avenue, Central Park West kind of axes are in the 150 to 180 foot height. A building that's recently built that's interesting to consider on the Upper East Side is it's a building called the Hawthorne, but it's on 86th Street and Lexington Avenue on the northwest corner there. It used to be, it's a subway entrance is
Yes.
that one. And it used to have it had a lot of different stores. But anyhow, it's the northeast corner of 86th Street and Lexington. And that's a 210, that's building's built to 210 feet. And, I happen to think it's, for a building that scale, a handsome building, but it's undeniably a large building. That's a big building. So this is, this is not saying we have to have small buildings. It's just getting away from super talls or tall buildings. There's many other proposals and discussions and conversations about, well, let's see, how should we pick? Let's say 300 feet. Let's say 350 feet is a limit. Let's say 400 feet. I mean, there's no end of discussion about things like that, but 210 feet has established precedent and established legacy. And importantly, you can build to the established development potential of these lots of this district, and that's significant. So if that helps you envision what we're talking about, there's other examples, perhaps Elizabeth or Elaine or Anthony or others can point to others directly relevant on the Upper East Side. But I presume that gives you some idea to your question.
Yes, that's perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping you would give us some view of. One last follow-up, though. If we wanted to preserve the retail streetscape with the proposed zoning change that you would, amendments that you would like to make, what would the retail vision be that you have in mind? Mm-hmm. Or either preserving what's there or creating a new retail experience that would complement the zoning change?
Mm-hmm. Well, that is, that's the third leg of our three-legged stool here in terms of these concepts. They really do work together. There was, geez, I guess about 10 or 15 years ago, if I have my timing right, on the Upper West Side, serious initiatives led by Gail Brewer, accredited to Gail Brewer, to establish retail zoning criteria that favored local businesses, mom and pop businesses. And what that did was it limited the big box stores. It limited the unbroken storefront, the length that unbroken storefronts in one tenancy could be. It created all kinds of criteria. It limited X number of banks per this and that. And yeah, as an outgrowth, and then, it's felt that did some things very well and other things it didn't quite address so well. But in outgrowth of that, in about 4 years ago now or so, the city council developed a plan called the Plan for Retail Diversity, the Retail Plan for Diversity in the city. I don't have the exact title in the paper. But that put forward a very comprehensive program. It built on the kinds of schemes that were done on the Upper West Side. And it presents a very comprehensive program of controls, of zoning controls, of economic support, of licensing issues, of support for developers on the basis of rent and lease structures and so forth. It's quite a comprehensive report. In fact, it's so effective, and we all thought it really addressed the issues so well that we, with deference to the city council, and it was also approved by the city council, we adopted that as the program for the small retail support. So in my write-up is, did I say that much about it? I said something, yeah, I said a few things about it. If I'll refer you to that, just because there's a lot in there about that. And I'm looking for here we go. It would be on page 6. There's a page and a half of descriptions of that program. And I think that'll give you a pretty good idea, much more explicit answer to your question.
Well, it's fair to say that retail obviously is a work in progress as buyer preferences change. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of talk on it. But thank you very much for responding. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate your interest.
Thank you. And the last member of the public, and then we will go to the board, is Ella Baff.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate it very much. You mentioned that it takes years potentially to go through this process. What happens in the interim during the process? Specifically, what can I do? Can we do? And does the process itself prevent any actions that might be taken in terms of overdevelopment? Does it stall the process of overdevelopment at all? Thank you.
Well, I certainly appreciate the sense of the question. There is very little you can do until it's legislation. At a certain point in the course of its pathway to legislation, there can be a certain kind, with building department regulations of various sorts, there are lookbacks to where you have to have started construction at such and such a time in relation to such and such criteria. With zoning changes, those things can be established as well. So there are certain limited lookbacks by which you have to get approved plans either underway or approved or foundations built or various criteria like that. I can't really say at this juncture how we could incorporate those ideas at this level of planning for the special districts. And if it looked like these were going to be becoming law, you can be sure that would spur people's developments as it got closer as well. So I think I appreciate the question. And as we go forward, we should look at ways in which we can influence development in the course of these moving from proposals to laws. I can't give you a more exact answer at this point.
Thank you. Okie doke. The board, we start with Shari Weiner.
Thank you. Thanks, Tuck, for getting us to this point. I have a couple of just real short questions. You've been interacting with city planning. Have you gotten any sense from them on what their response would be? And secondly, is there any specific time frame that has to be followed before it gets to city council? And I thought it might be helpful to know why were just Lenox Hill and Yorkville do not have any zoning where all the other areas around us too. Do you have any insight, and might that be helpful as we move forward?
Yeah, well, I'll deal with your last question first. It's a really interesting question, and I addressed that a little bit in the write-up about the historical conditions that gave rise to the controls on the western portion of the Upper East Side, that is Fifth Avenue to Lexington Avenue. And they had, various limited height districts, special districts, they had historic districts, they had a variety of controls that basically served to regulate building heights there. And if you recall earlier, I know you've been around with this for a long time, in the some of those earlier presentations I did, I showed the maps of zoning controls of the whole Upper East Side, and you could see the western portion had all these different overlays on it, districts, and like a wall, like a line at 3rd Avenue East, there was nothing. So there's a heritage, there's a history of controls in the western half and not on the eastern half. And historically, the 3rd Avenue L defined a lot of the character of development on 3rd Avenue in those parts east, and populations were very different, and so on and so forth. So that, they had different attention or lack thereof. And in any case, that's the situation that we have in front of us. On the other hand, you can look to East Harlem now and the rezoning that's been done there, and the limited height districts that have been established, and the development limitations and so on and so forth. So, that too has been a longstanding, ardently fought kind of question to enact those controls, which are now in place, which, as I mentioned, thereby leaves Lenox Hill and Yorkville the sole communities without such controls. And if ever there was ripe development locations, it's along there. So that's what I can tell you. I mean, perhaps other city historians amongst us can say more about the conditions from which arose this condition, but I'm not sure. Your other question, I'm sorry, you also asked.
Did you gotten any feedback from
yeah.
city planning, and do they have a specific timeline that they have to meet up until the point it gets to city council?
Yeah, once it gets to the city council, ULURP has timelines with it.
No, I understand that. That's what I was wondering before, if they can breaking it out, or do they have to meet deadlines for review?
Yeah, no, they do not. And in terms of feedback, with our prior administration, there's a lot of reluctance to do development controls. There was a lot of encouragement of development, and that reflected down through the city planning leadership. And we met with them initially, and several board people over there as well, and they Elizabeth Sue Chen made no effort to hide the fact that, well, we don't support this initiative. And, the mayor doesn't support this initiative. No, we don't support this initiative. And all the other good planners and design professionals who were sitting around there, therefore, that was the marching orders. And, my response at that time was, she said, but, recognizing the power of the community board and the nature of their position in the public enfranchisement that they had, they said, but we'll work with you to do this, but we don't support it. You should know that. And so, my response basically is, well, that's a step in the right direction. We'll work together. And clearly, rather than, it's is the glass half empty or half full or lemonades or however you want to, what euphemism you want to use. But I said, well, that's good. So we have our tasks cut out for us. We have, we'll figure out where we can find common ground and how we can make this move forward. Okay, so that fast forward to now, I think Dan Gorodnick is a little more balanced in his approach, the new CDC head. I think it was always my feeling that, these proposals have a lot of rationale to them. They make a lot of sense, looked at on their own and certainly looked at in context with the rest of the city. So I like to think that we'll have support from the professional staff within the Department of City Planning. And I know just with our direct contact, there's a cordial and professional conversation. I haven't talked to him that much, but he recognized where he's coming from, was helpful in making that happen. And we'll see going forward what kind of support we can have. And where Eric Adams comes down on these kind of questions, that influence really trickles down, and he has a lot of proclamations about how he wants things to happen, but still, very compelling argument. You come back to the fact this is the densest community in the city. So fine, do a lot of development, build a lot of buildings. Everywhere else first. There's a logic to that, And there's one other thing that I'll mention too. Kathy Hochul, the governor, and her administration has made conversation about increasing the FAR limits arbitrarily from Albany on the city. And there's a lot of resistance to that, but that further underscores the validity of these special districts requirements, because the last thing we need is more density in Lenox Hill and Yorkville. And these will obviate the ability of those changes to be directed from afar. So, we'll see. It's all very political, and it's going to get a lot of attention because it's a big plan. And I think, it's our task, my task first amongst others, is to craft a good argument and sell it well, because I believe in it. And I think there's a lot to believe in there. So that's what that's the horse we'll ride in on, as they say.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sherry. And now, Marco, and I would like to end this about 8 to give the next item time. So I think we'd be very grateful for a little brevity here, but I don't want to cramp anybody's style. Marco.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Todd, for your work. And also, I have to acknowledge that Mr. Tony Lechuga is present. He represented the Department of City Planning. Thank you so much, Mr. Lechuga, for being right here. I'm still supporting the work that you're doing. I had to acknowledge you are in a very friendly territory. Yes, because my concern is the other strap hangers. You will be grilled, and that's my concern. My experience in all these years reading all the applicants for Euler, usually most of them, they don't answer the questionnaire. What they do is they prepare a document where basically establish the introduction, history, discussion of the problem, and different scenarios in order to make their case. And probably that will be my suggestion, that you should orient this application. Yes, I agree, obviously. We can go beyond of these 3 major goals that we have. But that will be a very big project, and we never ended probably to prepare the document. So I think we have to stand in the 3 points that you mentioned already. If you see my background, I think, Todd, you are very familiar with my background. My background, basically, what it is a survey of each avenue in each side, east and west. The goal was to determine how many buildings go beyond 210? So to make a little bit shorter and quicker my point, basically I funded 124 buildings that went beyond 210 feet. So the majority is not going beyond 210. So what are those 120 buildings, 24 buildings? 40% are pubs. This is the concept of the pubs was beautiful. I'm still in love with the concept, but it was manipulated and changed the good concept of that program that is no longer available in our district. Because actually what it is, this good concept is just only for private, elevated, and sunken pubs with almost no benefits for the community. Then you have 42.7% buildings that there has been producing affordable housing. And this affordable housing, we don't know what's going behind all that. Maybe they already expired. Maybe we don't have any more affordable housing. It's more likely that. So I don't want to go in that direction, because if I go in that direction, I mean, it will be baseless argument, because I do not have data to support what I'm saying. But I'm pretty sure that most of them are gone. So what we have, 42% of those buildings went all the way beyond 210 right now with minor or marginal benefits for the community. I think that is the two major points. Then we have an 8.5 for private developments. Those developments went up. And these developments, they don't contribute in anything for affordable housing. Usually, these buildings are taller because they know that the real estate, they sell the view. When they sell the view, it's just only for those people that have a lot of money to pay the view, which is free, by the way. And then we have the other part, the 8.4%. That is Euler applications. Euler or discretionary actions that the community did not receive no benefits at all. Who are they? This is basically their hospitals. They are the creator, they has been taken, they went beyond that. They has been not only that they don't contribute in open spaces or affordable housing. On the contrary, they has been impacting in the affordable housing, because usually especially the schools, medicine schools, they buy or they rent for the medical students affordable housing. So we are losing.
Could you wind up, Marco?
Going in that direction, please. So basically, we don't have much benefits, and I think it's missing in that part of your analysis. Then let me put my perception about somebody asked you about the streetscape. Again, if you see my background, I thought that you're gonna put the regular 100 feet and then setbacks. On my right side, my left side, you find that more movement, rhythm, concatenation, and continuity of the street wall. On the other side, I found it that just basically we have a plain wall, monotonous wall without no intentions to create some way to have a livable city. So the streetscape, I think we have to.
Marco, could you wind up, please?
Oh, finally, let me. Okay, I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco.
Got it. Thank you.
Craig Lader.
Hi, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Chuck, for the presentation. I had a few brief comments, but first I just want to start with a question. Just to be clear, is the intention to keep the existing zoning in place except for the height limits?
Well, essentially, yes, but we're talking third through York Avenue too. We're only referring to the avenues.
Right.
And then we're establishing contextual base. So, I mean, there are things related to that you know, how much else is going to be left when we're done with this? It's going to transform the existing zoning substantially. Also, there'll be legislation related to tenant preservation and legislation related to support for small retail. So it's probably better looked at as a subtractive question than an additive one. In other words, what will remain? Well, the character of the neighborhood, the character of the avenues, and you know what we see there will remain, except for the fact that development will continue on developable sites, and they'll
Right.
you know, and so it'll look similar, except there won't be taller, slender towers.
Yeah, well, I guess it's just not clear, and I guess what's confusing me just as I read this is that it doesn't give me a good sense of what the proposed FAR and lot coverage requirements and the details are specifically that we are proposing. Aside, the only thing that's clear is the 210-foot limit, but I think it's important for people to be able to understand a little more to understand what that future development is going to be aside from just the context. Beyond that, I just want to say that a few other things. So I know the preference, as you said, isn't to suggest changes to the document, but there's one thing that I think I need to point out, which is really about an accuracy issue. So in the pre-application, the description of the neighboring district to the south, I think, is not necessarily correct, because it says, and I'm quoting here, that the 1,000 feet south of our district is in Community Board 6 is business focused and not predominantly residential, and has a considerably different character and purpose than the Lenox Hill and Yorkville communities, and correspondingly different zoning reflecting of that community's needs. But aside from 3rd Avenue and the adjacent lots, those 1,000 feet south of the boundary in CB6 is very residential, especially along 2nd, 1st, and 7th Place and the corresponding side streets. So for example, on the cross streets, zoning is either all R8 or R10, which is the same zoning in place along many parts of CB8, in which we're using as an example of the desired zoning within this application. And then it's C19 on 2nd Avenue, which is the same zoning currently in place. So in other words, I believe that it's not really fundamentally different from what's in place here. And I don't want us to have an application that is suggesting something that isn't actually the case. And then let me just quickly go through my other questions leading to comments leading to questions, and you can hopefully just address that quickly, because I want to be respectful of your time and others. So I also think that the pre-application is currently written and should be enhanced to address a few other, what I believe are missing elements. So first, it seems to have no teeth for preserving tenements in existing low-rise development. And it's not clear as to how exactly this would be accomplished. You mentioned that there would be associated legislation, but I'm not, unless that were spelled out a little, I think it doesn't really get to that. And then it doesn't mention anything whatsoever about trying to generate affordable housing, as a few people have already commented. It's only about preservation, and then doesn't explain what policies would actually prevent developers from continuing to assemble lots and putting up 210-foot buildings that still end up replacing low-rise buildings and tenements that currently have affordable units in favor of luxury developments that would still result in loss of the affordable housing that we speak to wanting to preserve. So you mentioned that you had to be selective as to what to include in the application, but I think it speaks volumes that any mention of generating new affordable housing is excluded at this point, as if we're intentionally leaving it out because it isn't really a priority for a community district. So as you said, it may be a long process, but this pre-application will shape the perception of the proposal. And right now, at least in my mind, it screams no new affordable housing. So if you wouldn't mind just addressing those, exactly how the proposed action would achieve the preservation goals, and why increasing affordable housing was not more explicitly listed as a rationale, I would really appreciate it. And I'll just leave it with that, because I don't want to take any more time. Thank you very much.
Well, that's great. No, I really appreciate your questions and observations. In order to present it, particularly, I I should revise a little bit of the way I've characterized Midtown East. You're right about that. That's simply factual. So I will pay attention to that, attend to that. Developments will happen. You know, this isn't solving every problem. And it's not, it's limited focus. And what it's not doing is not taking a broad stand against development potential. What it is taking a broad stand against is out of scale development potential and the loss of existing affordable housing. And the latter point is for the virtues of preserving that housing on the one hand, from a housing perspective, affordable housing perspective, and on the other hand, it's addressed to the contextual, historic fabric, urban fabric, and character that those buildings represent along the avenues. So it's they're not landmarkable, but they do contribute an important part of the character of the city. So it's intended to do that. Developers, I mean, they're limited to how much they can remove existing rent-regulated apartment in ways that hadn't been before, but those things can change and will change. Plus, people being bought out and all kinds of things, and still the unit has to maintain and so forth. But there's a lot of complexity to that. Currently, those without the tenement preservation portion, what will happen is that there'll be an unbroken wall of 210-foot buildings ultimately, because right now the only reason people point to the virtues of tall buildings as preserving existing tenements through the mechanisms of zoning lot mergers. And once you do a zoning lot merger, you've locked up the remaining development potential of X number of tenements, while you've used up or demolished the development for Y amount of tenements. In other words, they take some and preserve others. It's a pretty crude tool for housing preservation. It's a very crude tool for zoning and community regulation. So what this does is it says these have virtue. These existing buildings have virtue because of their affordable housing that's there, and also because of the historic character they have, and it a priori preserves them. And there is precedent for that. It's a big bite. People are not going to like that, particularly if they haven't owned a tenement. There can be some discussion in times going forward about how much we can allow additions to those buildings, in what way, and so forth. And I think there's an argument perhaps to be made for that. So that's 2/3 of, I think, what I heard from you saying. But the other third is like, why aren't we now more forcefully with affordable housing legislation and program? And I'd submit that it's a much bigger question. It's a citywide question. It's not dependent on Yorkville and Lenox Hill communities to solve this problem for themselves, much less for the city. It's a crying need, and it affects every place. But we can't solve every problem through this legislation. And this is directed towards specific things in a way that's defensible and solvable for these. If it doesn't mean we can't support other legislation to have other affordable housing provisions in the Upper East Side as well as everywhere else. We can, and clearly there are many people, myself included, who would like to. But I think we have to pick our battles in a way, and this isn't precluding any of that. It's just not making that particular feature primary. It's not about affordable housing that way beyond the support for existing affordable housing and the virtues that presents for a couple of reasons. I mean, it's not a perfect answer, but it's the real world too. I'm not sure.
I very much appreciate your response, and
okay.
I don't want to. I can talk about this for hours, but I don't want to do that to anyone. So thank you.
Well, I look forward to talking more about it. I appreciate your comments. Thank you for that. And it's a step along the way, but thank you.
Thank you. Alida is next.
Thank you. I'll try and be quick. Hi, Tuck. Thank you for the presentation. there's really a need to change the height limits, and I think that things are a little backwards in the way that there's some thought about this, and I'd like to be corrected if I'm wrong. The bigger the building, the bulkier the building, the more pressure it puts on the economics of landowners to sell, because developers can make more money by going bigger or going higher. And so therefore they'll offer more money, and therefore there's pressure. It's why we're losing small businesses. It's why they demolish and buy buildings before they have any intent to construct. And a lot of it seems to be the as of right permission here to build without any restriction from the city. I had an argument in my head about the affordable housing, which we all want. But what if you look at the lobbies of the tall buildings on the avenues, most of them are not designed for small businesses. Even the building that you talked about on 86th and Lexington, it has Old Navy on the second floor and nothing in the lobby, as far as I can remember. And a lot of the new buildings have nothing in the lobby. As co-chair of the Small Business Committee, I'm really focused on what's going on with small businesses, and there's no provision for small business space in these new developments, and it's destroying the community. We have no infrastructure. The effect on the environment is egregious. I just read something, I wish I could remember, in the Times or in another magazine about how so much air pollution is generated by these buildings, rolling brownouts in the summer, and still more and more and more and more people, or more and more and more and more foreign investment in the neighborhood. There's nothing else like it around Manhattan.
I've spoken to every question you've raised. I even did the question of the energy usage that Andrew Ravishir.
I know.
But I've spoken to every question you've raised. As far as retail and small local retail, it's an integral part of this proposal. In terms of building size, you use the word big. Do you mean tall or massive? You can't mean square footage, because that's not changing.
I don't mean square footage. I mean either the ability to get more, to go higher, to
more
build
square footage,
more, not more square footage. You've just acknowledged that they don't have more square footage, but the higher the apartments, the higher the prices that they can charge.
Look at Billionaires Row; those are FAR 10 buildings.
Right. And so I guess I just am reiterating what you've said, and so I'll stop. Is that
I hear you make an argument for what we're doing.
there's a pressure on people to sell, and the intangibles of neighborhoods are cast aside by this administration. We haven't really seen it, but that's what I've heard in Brooklyn and seen it there, by the prior administration to that. The intangibles really matter to a city, and this is just essential, I think, while not addressing, and I have my own views about not addressing affordable housing for different reasons. This is essential to maintaining the character. And if financial pressure on property owners is relieved somehow, it may lead to more affordable housing, just because they're not selling for the prices of what can be charged, because the land isn't worth as much if they can't do whatever they want. So I'll just stop here, but thank you. I don't know if I'm sounding wrong or not, but thank you.
No, I appreciate your comments. I mean, they really speak to the concerns that we've been wrestling with, I think, and hopefully have some proposed solutions for it. They're not perfect. They're not the last word about them, but they're coherent and targeted, and they'll only get better, I hope. So thank you.
Thank you. And now Michelle.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Tuck. Terrific presentation, and your responses are very, very informative and thorough. I just want to say that I applaud the scope of this presentation, the scope of our effort, I should say, and I don't think we should expand it in any way. I think by originally deciding to go forward with this project, we already had our reasons for why we wanted a height limit in these two districts. Everything that Tuck has done has supported our original premise, and I think we should remain on that path. And convince others to join us. And to address affordable housing, I think Tuck's comments were very telling, because the money is at the top when you talk about tall buildings. The very fact that in this neighborhood, the buildings will, and now I'll say, only be 210 feet. At one time, that was a tremendous building. But now we'll say, because they'll only be 210 feet, by virtue of that alone, the prices will be suppressed. They will not, those apartments at the top will not command the same monies that those that are on the 50th floor, 500, or whatever. You get my point. So
Yeah.
I would like to suggest that we don't go off on a toot here, that we don't try to expand it, but we concentrate in every way we can to support our original effort and make more and more arguments to support it and make more and more pleas to bring others on board. So thanks very much. This was explanatory tonight and informative tonight. And I thank you, Tuck, for your time and for being so forthcoming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I also agree that if we're ever going to get this done, we're not going to poke at it and change it for the next 50 years. We've got to start with something, and let's start with this. It's what we've asked for. And okay, let's see who the next. Do we have Adam Wald? But you've taken your paw down. Is that correct? Yes. Okie doke. It's over to you, Anthony.
Great.
On the second section.
Yes. And so some of you may recall, first of all, thank you, Tuck, for a good presentation and a wonderful presentation, tremendous amount of work. And sadly, we're still only at the beginning. So we'll all just have to keep going. Item number 2 is obviously related. It's another zoning issue, and it has to do with some specific anomalies within Community District 8. And Adam Wald he took his hand down last time, but now he has to effectively put it back up and explain and talk to us about this in more detail about the zoning changes, proposed zoning changes that to those certain areas in our district. And if he is unmuted, and he probably wants he might want control of or might want a presentation. So at any rate, Adam, go ahead.
Thank you, Anthony. I don't know, did you want me to share the 3-pager that we just worked on?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So can I share screen?
You can share your screen now.
Do that one. I want to make sure I'm okay. Okay. So do I need to make it full, or can everyone see it, or is that better?
That's better. Yeah.
So yes, as we discussed at the last zoning and development meeting, there are portions of 6 blocks in what we're calling Upper Yorkville that are zoned for manufacturing and for high-intensity commercial uses. And as we've seen over the last couple of years, folks have decided to build some interesting projects, or have contemplated developing some interesting projects in these zoning districts. A 150-foot tall self-storage project comes to mind. A potential 10 to 15-story life science project also comes to mind. These are all things that can be built as of right in the C8-4 and the M1-4 zones, given a large enough parcel of land. So given that there's also a lot of reduction in sites that can be used to develop residential housing, a lot of which are being taken over by the hospitals, I thought it prudent we investigate a way to create a framework to develop more housing, and specifically rental housing. As you know, if we go for an upzoning or a rezoning, it will be a mandatory inclusionary housing in which we will have mandatory affordable housing, which will address district need 1, which is an important thing for the community board to stick to, which is to promote affordable housing. So if we go to the next, this is the map of the locations, and this is the current zoning. So it's portions of 6 blocks, and they're all in the East 90s, as we saw in the previous map. And the commercial zoning is 5 for the C8-4 zones and 2 for the M1-4 zone, and the community facility is 6.5. And using community facility density, you can actually stack uses. So you could build a 6.5 community facility project, of which 5 could be commercial. So that's why it's important to not necessarily look at the commercial densities, but to note that you can stack these uses under the 6.5 FAR. And so this is what can be built now. And I had originally, and we'll go to the next slide, I originally contemplated 10 and 12 FARs projects, but at the suggestion of your wise co-chairs, I added R7D, R8X, and R9X zoning options. We can get into the financial merits of R7D and R8X at a later junction. You may recognize the R9X zoning because that was featured in the recently passed NoHo rezoning. So it's more of a, I don't necessarily have a certain framework that I think needs to be pushed, but I'd love to hear everyone's feedback and what ideas are going to stick here. And if everyone agrees with this concept that we should try to create a framework for more rental and more rental affordable housing. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Adam. I guess there are a number of questions that come up and that I'll just ask, even though we've sort of talked about it already. The change in zoning from commercial or manufacturing to residential will effectively do what in terms of allowable uses?
Well, instead of continuing this we're exposed for this high density commercial uses. You could potentially in some of these sites build multiple 100,000 square foot self-storage buildings where you staff 2 or 3 people. So or 4 people, you take over half a block, you build a 150, 200 foot tall self-storage building, and there's no one working there. And it's taking away the opportunity to build more rental housing and more affordable housing in line with our statement of district needs.
So essentially it's a question of prohibiting commercial uses effectively in those mid blocks and yes, replacing the potential commercial uses with potential residential uses.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So let's see first if there are members of the public. I see one right here. Boaz Galil.
Yes, I support the plan. Not sure if you can add to the zoning that those blocks will be focused on rental rental apartments, tall buildings, lots of housing. But yeah, good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's see, are there any other members of the public? I don't see any whoops, wait a minute. No, I don't see any right now. So we can go to the board. Oh no, one more. Dylan Geronimo Kennedy.
Yep, I also just wanted to echo that. I like that, moving from something that could just be self-storage to providing more spaces where people can live. I think that's a great idea, and that's important, not to just have it be a place where you technically put two people in to, technically be mixed, but to really have incentives in place for there to be lots of houses or lots of apartments for people to live. I like that idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we do go to the board now, and we start with Marco.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Adam, for this initiative. I think I appreciate that. But at this time, I'm going to ask only questions. And please elaborate my questions. Some of the questions I'm going to read exactly what are you saying, and I need to know the clarifications in order to understand what exactly what it means. First of all, you said one of your goals said correct a historical injustice. A historical injustice. I need to know by eliminating artificial barrier between NYCHA and the balance of the Upper Side. Please be very explanatory with examples. And then you said in the same in the second goal said creates a framework to promote more affordable housing. The other said creates a frame to promote more rental housing. I'm going to add two more questions. My first question is, what is affordable? Be specific. Talk about income. Talk about everything in detail. We need to know what is your idea. I would like to know that. And finally, presently there are some affordable housing in those blocks. And in your proposal, will you increase of the number of existing units? That means we'll have a net positive gain what we have existing. Please elaborate these 5 questions. Thank you.
That's a lot of questions. I hope I kept track of everything. What I would say is that when this gets rezoned, it is mandatory inclusionary housing. Okay, so for mandatory inclusionary housing, there would be these MIH option 1 and MIH option 2, which sets the affordability bands for AMIs. Either it's 25% affordable or 30% affordable. That's the answer to that question. The intention of this rezoning is not to replace the existing rent stabilized housing in these areas. This is more to be directed towards those sites, those larger sites in which significant commercial development can be built, with large floor plates. It is not meant to replace existing rent stabilized housing. In terms of the barriers, there's this artificial barrier between the neighborhood and the NYCHA housing, and it seems that there's not, it's not fluid from the mixed use and the residential portions of the neighborhood into the NYCHA housing. And we have this artificial C8M14 barrier where there's a lot of heavier uses that kind of block off NYCHA. And folks have written about this, and I echo what they've written.
Can you be a little bit more specific about that, please?
I mean, I have to go property by property and
no, in general.
It's too much. You can go property by property and go into the specific auto uses and the.
Just give me an example. Simple.
I'd have to look at the individual block and pull it up, but and go lot by lot to show you which ones it is. But what was the other question? I'd have to look all that up.
Oh, what do you consider affordable? And be specific again.
The affordable is MIH option 1, option 2. You know MIH option 1, option.
Yeah, I know that, but I
Okay.
would like to hear what you say. See, remember, yeah, you have just only a 5-floor area in C8 and 2 on MA1-4. So probably if you go to 10, you have a lot of square footage right there. So I would like to know you're going to receive benefits. Yes, the community is going to have a more residential concept, but I would like to know what are the benefits that the community is going to receive. So that is what is my question. I need to know exactly what it means so I can perceive and I can comment. No, I'm not commenting today anything. I want to need your answers.
Okay, MIH option 1 is 25% of the development is affordable, not less than 10% at 40% AMI, and a weighted average of 60% AMI. No income band is over 130% AMI. And for option 2, 30% of the project has to have a weighted average of 80% AMI. No income band may exceed 130% AMI. That's the answer.
Yeah, I think it's a good answer. And so you answer, and let me be very clear. You're saying that we are not going to have a positive net increase of affordable housing on the top what we have. Is that correct?
No,
did I understand
that's
correct?
not correct. That's not correct at all. I don't know where that's from.
Oh, okay. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, for instance, a development has 20 affordable units. And then if you go into 10, let's go for that example, 10. So the only thing you said, if you want to go 12, then you have mandatory inclusionary housing, and then you have affordable housing. And the other existing 20 is gone. Is that correct? I'm right or wrong to understand what you're saying?
No, I don't understand the question. If I have an existing 1-story garage building and I build 100,000 feet of rental housing and I have 30% of it as affordable units, I think that's a net positive.
What I'm saying to you is because I know more or less exactly what you're saying, because I study deeper now, but I'm still having some difficulty to understand your point of view. I saw that there is some residential, especially 90th Street on the north side is completely residential.
Okay.
That is, for instance, one property have 20, another has 17 or 20. So my question to you is, if this property is becoming R10, okay, they have 10 or 15 existing plus an extra affordable housing or not at all? Just only the mandatory, whatever it is.
You bring up a good point. Maybe that's a portion that needs to be revisited and not even included in this. If there's too much residential development on that side of the street, maybe it doesn't need to be included in the proposal. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, no. I'm asking questions only. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marco. I think one of the things that we can talk about going forward, just, and Alida, I know you're next, is a real kind of very, it's horrible, fine-grained analysis of what actually the building's already there on the ground in this district and in these little areas. And so I think that's something that has to happen almost next in order to really flesh out these very good points that Marco's making about replacement of, if you're replacing 20 units with 20 units, you're not doing anything except making them newer units. So anyway, yeah. So I think that analysis has to happen. Alida.
Thank you. Adam, I know that you are concerned about zoning issues and affordable housing, and I give you a lot of credit for that. So I'm asking if you could explain something. Could you put the slide up, the second slide, please, with the different blocks? Because there's something I basically really don't understand. On these streets, I think 90th Street has a tall hotel. Are the streets between York and First or First and Second, they're residential, are they RAB zoned?
No, they're all zoned. These are all commercial zone.
No, not these
Oh.
blocks, but adjoining, like a block further west. If you take the border avenue of First or Second or York and you go further, or well, First and Second, and you go further west, are they R8B, those residential blocks?
So some are R8. There's an R.
Yeah, it's a weird.
Yeah, some are R8.
And what does that mean in terms of height?
Well, R8 can be both, can be quality housing as well as and height factor. So there's also C28 on the avenues. In the mid blocks, yeah, there's a mix of R8B and R8 and C46. So specifically, where are you asking? Which
Well,
specific
what the adjacent blocks going further west look like residentially? Because I'm wondering, you alluded to it, but economically, what will developers really push for in terms of a rezoning here? They're going to want something that's not limited to R8B, even though those are side streets. And this is where I think I don't know. I know I don't know as much as you or the chairs or Elaine, for instance, but I'm wondering what would make sense, given that they want to make a profit, understandably, but what would make sense in terms of what can be built? And could it be ironclad that it is affordable housing in this community? And does it go in perpetuity, or is it something that in 30 years, the units revert to market rate, which is, I believe, the Soho plan? And also, I think there's a loophole in the Soho NoHo plan that they don't have to, if there's an economic reason for it, they don't have to put affordable housing in some of the new construction. So if the basis for this is affordable housing, how permanent is it? And what does it really mean? Because more high towers are great for bringing in that kind of affordable housing, but so that's, I guess I'm just wondering, and I know I'm not being articulate about it. I have questions that I haven't been able to quite figure out what they mean even to me. So thank you.
I mean, I think the idea here is to follow mandatory inclusionary housing. Ideally, the developments would be large enough that they can't do, I think what you're referring to is the opt-out, which if it's less than 12,500 square feet, you do not have to build the affordable and the MIH. And if it's between 12,500 and 25,000 square feet, there's a way to kind of skirt it through a supplemental payment to affordable housing fund. And anything above that is MIH, it's mandatory inclusionary housing.
So how long does that last? Is that 30 years, 20 years, forever?
35, 40, or 45. I have to check.
So they, I guess, would sunset be the right word? Because those blocks, they give you a spectacular view of the river. And the higher up you go, the more valuable the apartments are going to be. I don't even know why I brought that up. So given what we're looking for the rest of the district in terms of 210, I just am wondering how it all meshes with affordable housing. And also and affordable housing is paramount, but is there anything that we give up in terms of what it is now? Because I know that there's, ever since the city ceded its obligation to build affordable housing to for-profit developers, they always need a profit. So I'm wondering what we are giving up to pursue this. And again, I know that affordable housing is key and it's critical, and I applaud you for being creative in thinking like this. I do want to say.
I don't know if we're necessarily giving up anything in specific. So I don't really have an answer to that.
Okay, well, I guess if I can think of something better, I'll raise my hand again. But in the meantime, thank you so much for thinking of this and presenting it as clearly as possible, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Alita. Next, we have Michelle.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam. This took some work and thought, and I really appreciate it. Have you designated within this plan exactly what you would like to see on each street? In other words, if you change the zoning, are you recommending which zoning change you're proposing for which of these streets specifically?
No, I'm not, but I would note that there will likely be a private application for the M14 portion of this in which they will seek a 12 FAR. I'm not saying that that's necessarily appropriate, but I would think that the upper bounds of what's currently allowed might be reasonable for that. I was gearing towards the higher densities in order to build, larger projects. But I understand that some folks may want lower density, whether it's the R9X.
Also, you're talking about up to 210 in the mid block when you say approximate stories, 20 stories, so it's 215, 210, 215. That sort of violates all our concerns about having a 75-foot height limit on the mid blocks. Why would we want a higher height limit here?
I would point out that currently the C84 and the M14 zones have no height cap. Someone
Well, that may be, but what you're proposing is that they have a higher height. They have a height cap that's more likely on the avenues. So why are you proposing such a high height cap for the mid block?
I thought that in general, folks might want to see 150 to 180 foot tall residential buildings as opposed to 150 foot tall self-storage buildings or life science.
Okay, so now it's a matter of what we're calling tall, but that's okay, I get it. Now also, there's some merit to having commercial zoning in our area. I realize as you look at this, it's all congregated sort of in the upper part of our district. And so maybe that's of some concern. But for example, we had a gas station on York Avenue and 62nd Street. I assume that was zoned for that gas station. It's gone. We certainly could use a gas station there. We had automotive mechanics in the 70s. There is one now on 83rd Street between 2nd and 3rd. I'm thrilled that he's there. I imagine that site is zoned for him to appropriately be there. I think we need some commercial. I would like to see a repair shop, a gas station, those kinds of facilities that this whole district is sadly lacking. And we actually have to go a long way to get the benefit of some of that. And also, how are you addressing retail in your proposal?
Well, to answer your first question about the commercial zoning, I tend to agree with you, other than the hospitals and the condo developers are taking every single last quality piece of land in the Upper East Side. And if you rezone something with mandatory inclusionary housing, it kind of puts the direction of the development going one way towards rental, as opposed to continued high density commercial uses or heavy commercial uses. So I think that's what kind of prompted me to do this in the beginning, which was, in order to create a framework to develop more rental housing.
Well, even rental buildings can be, they can be mixed use.
They
So
could, yes. So
you know, you could have retail and condo, and you can have condop, and you can have
sure.
the retail on the bottom being a condominium, and you can have the upper level being half co-op and half rentals. So I don't know that this plan naturally ensures what you think it ensures. And also, I think if we need anything in that area, it could be a park or a garden or something like that. How does your proposed zoning deal with that?
I mean, these are all privately owned lots. It doesn't do anything with parks necessarily. I don't know if it's feasible to turn a lot in the middle of the block into a park, unless you want to bring back Pops.
Well, Pops, well, yeah, not a bad idea. They didn't work so well, but it depended on what the parameters were. And anyway, I think this is a really good first start, but those are some of my concerns. So I'm glad we're talking about this tonight. I thank you for the effort. And this was substantial. I think Anthony's thought about having to do a building, you know, what's there now kind of evaluation, of course, makes sense.
Yep,
but as an initial presentation and, you know, a plan of how to go forward, this certainly serves as that. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Michelle. And now we have Elaine.
Thank you. And Adam, lots of work. I hope you enjoyed having fun doing it. I have many of this. I echo a lot of what Michelle said. I think our community should have more manufacturing. We had it, particularly from York to the river. We've lost it. We lost in the 90s. I think it was 91st. and York, the gas station there, the car washes. There are things that our community needs. And while affordable housing is important, the reality is we've never been successful in keeping the affordable housing when we had all the development going on, because deals were made between the developers and the elected officials to move that affordable housing to the other boroughs. Now those other boroughs don't want it. We warned them that this would happen if they didn't work with us. It was illegal what happened. I would love to see us identify what we lost and sue the city to get those units put and find some city-owned property in our neighborhood, or let the city buy it and we build affordable housing where it should have been in the first place in our community. I have real concerns about this, especially since ideally what I would like to see on the side streets here is it go to R8B. Now, would the owners like to see that? Absolutely not. But there's no reason why the northern part in these particular spots not have it. The reason it's not R8B was because there had already been tall buildings on the avenue, and contextually it was not correct. I talked about this at the last meeting, but you know, I am very concerned about, without knowing more, I understand, Adam, what you're thinking, but we didn't have MIH to begin with in the neighborhood. I don't know how it would fare. So I need to know a lot more. I'd also suggest our energies have to go to the two special districts and get that moving. To take on two different zoning things, I think would be a major challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. I guess Craig is next.
Hi, thank you. Adam, I just want to send my appreciation that you spent all the time and energy trying to put this together. And I really am impressed with what you've been able to come up with as a baseline proposal. I think we all see, and we heard at our full board meeting a few weeks back, that the current project taking place on 90th Street has already proven to be incredibly disruptive, at least from a construction standpoint. And even my family members have told me that it is insanely loud there, even during the permissible hours. And unfortunately, I think that will continue to be disruptive in terms of being a permanent inappropriate use based solely on based on every metric except solely for the fact that it was zoned to allow a bulky and vapid self-storage facility over there. So I really think that with this, we're onto something here, and we could hopefully generate significant affordable housing through MIH. And I just want to remind everyone and that at the end of the day, if we don't change the current zoning, we likely eventually will get the buildings at heights that we don't want to see, just with the inappropriate uses that I think most of us don't want to see. And I would strongly object to the idea that we should be prioritizing other uses over affordable housing and residential uses on what are residential blocks. And it would be a big loss at the end of the day if we didn't, rather than having comparable development that actually achieves our district's top priority. So if we're talking the talk, we need to really walk the walk when it comes to affordable housing. And people may be surprised to hear this, but I think it is appropriate to be talking about height limits and being contextual on these mid blocks over here. Maybe we can go beyond what currently exists and beyond just R8B, but if it achieves our affordable housing goal, because sometimes we just need to be able to compromise to be able to get a little something that we need. So maybe we want to make sure we don't have unlimited heights as what currently exists, but I'm sure with enough work, we can come up with something that is rational and that has a chance of moving forward and being embraced by our community. So again, Adam, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Craig. And now we have Rita. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. I know that you and I have had many conversations over the years. Let me define what I'm talking about as affordable is between 30 and 100% AMI. We lost over 100,000 affordable apartments. We are talking about that under the current structure that developers don't make enough money. However, under the Mitchell-Lama structure, they made a great deal of money. And nobody really talks about whether we could ever duplicate that or not. What we don't have is in part of those, I'm going to use the example of 94th Street and First Avenue on the northwest corner. Mr. Fentner just put up a building and he got a incentive for building affordable housing in that building. It was supposed to be 25%. It came out to be only 12%, and he didn't have his 25% cut in half. We all know that there is dealing behind there. I think that you have done a marvelous job. All I ask, and I ask each and every one of you, what will happen to the city if we don't have affordable housing? And I'm not talking about, and you're talking about, well, 30% of affordable housing, but you're still building 70% of market rate. So we never get there. We never catch up. Not everybody is a millionaire. These are not people who are begging on the street. These are the people who are working in hospitals and libraries, schools, and whatever it is. What do we do with them? Do we just put them out on a farm because can't afford it? We can't afford to have them. So what I think is that we have not looked at getting federal help to have 100% affordable housing in some buildings that to be created. No, we're talking about it's created 10 years from now. But we don't have affordable housing. 165% AMI is not what we call affordable housing. All of Roosevelt Island was mandated to be 100% affordable housing. I don't know how it got shifted out there. And what's wrong with in perpetuity so that in another 25 years we end up in the same place again? Don't we learn from our experiences? So I just want to keep that in mind. I'm not versed enough to be able to tell you that your gas station would be a little further away because people in the suburbs really drive far to get gas. Thank you, but I hope you all think of what we could ask for to make it attractive enough for a developer to build affordable housing. Every developer that built Mitchell-Lama ended up to be a multi-millionaire. Many of those developers owned 5, 6 of those Mitchell-Lama developments. They're all out now. And I spoke to somebody and I asked during the pandemic when they weren't getting their rent and where the Section 8 people were paying their rent. I said, don't you wish you had stayed in the program? He said, you know, Rita, it was a great program. You know what why we had to get out? It was the paperwork. So we're shooting ourselves and then we're complaining that our foot hurts. So thank you, Adam, but I still want 100% affordable housing or we're never going to catch up. Catching up is not even a thought here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Leo, you.
Thank you so much. I understand that it's late, so I'll keep my comments brief. I understand that previous speakers have raised either concerns or additions to this proposal, and I will admit that I know a lot less about this issue. But from what I can see, this is an essential first step towards decreasing spatial inequality in this area, towards increasing affordable housing. And I think that it's an excellent proposal, and I firmly support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it looks as though Alita wants to speak again. And having had an additional thought, I'm sure. And so, Alita.
I'll be very quick. I think it is good for us as a community to support the kind of affordable housing. Details could be worked out. There was a terrible perception about the Upper East Side at the Blood Center. And we know that that's not true. And we know that we want affordable housing. And maybe this is a concrete way of really supporting the idea, changing the image and making it so that when we go to the city council on things, whatever they are, small business issues, all kinds of issues, we will be seen as an inclusive, non-exclusive community, and that would help. So that's just a different thought and just, I guess, an idea. So thank you very much, Anthony, and I will stop.
No, thank you, Alita. I think that was very well put.
Can I just say one thing in general?
Sure.
I was happy to testify to the various prosecutors, but I was more looking for suggestions, ideas, as much as I was willing to field questions. So happy to take as much constructive criticism as anyone's willing to offer, as
I think
opposed to defend my case.
yes, I think Adam, that I think the next step is that sort of analysis of what the buildings are now. You know, how big are they? What are, you know, that one of those blocks has a bunch of really big things on it already, like the gym. And so the question then becomes, is it, how fine grained is the change, and what's the most appropriate way to approach that? And I think that the key to the attractiveness of this is the notion that it encourages rental housing, which in turn will mandate affordable housing. And so I think the suggestions will continue, and certainly all the board members have your email, and I think members of the public can communicate through the office as they wish. So thanks again, Adam. I think this is.
Has there been any noise from the block 1540 applicant? Have you heard anything? Has Russell heard anything?
No.
You know? Okay. All right.
So far, keep our fingers crossed. And I see there is one more board member. Peggy, go ahead.
Thanks very much. And thank you, Adam, for your presentation. And thank you for saying that you would welcome suggestions. What I've been thinking about throughout this discussion is, as you know, when you add significantly to the housing stock, there are other considerations to weigh, such as the need for additional schools, perhaps. And in our community, we're very concerned about the lack of open space and parkland and other facilities like that. And I was just thinking, I'd be more comfortable with this whole proposal if there was a consideration of those issues and how adding to the housing stock significantly would work in terms of the facilities in the community and what more we'd need to add. And so that would be just my suggestion. Thank you.
Right. I think as part of a ULURP, they'll do a utilization study for the schools. Of course, using 2020 and 2021 numbers won't be very helpful, but using numbers from this year and the next year will be helpful in understanding that. You'd be surprised. There's been some significant rezonings and very little additions to the schools, which have been surprising to me. There was a big one downtown where they added very few school seats when they added 3,000 apartments. But that won't happen here.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, I think we can now, and thank you, Peggy. That was a very good point. I think we can now move to old business. Is there any old business? Lovely. Do I hear a new business? Wonderful. Now I wonder if we are in fact, Alita.
ULURP is broken, it needs fixing. I would urge this committee to take up at some point, when you don't have a full agenda, which may be never, the idea of fixing ULURP, where it's not so the reason it's broken is we saw this all with the blood center again, as well as other projects. It is so heavily tilted towards the applicant and so tilted away from the community that it is absurd. So that's my comment, my new business.
Both of these proposals, we're the applicant, Alita.
I know that. I know that. So except for us, of course. But
of course,
thank you, Adam.
If our proposals are turned down, it will just prove to all of us even further that ULURP is broken.
True that.
Okay, Marco.
can I suggest that can we adjourn the meeting? Is anybody can second?
Is there a second? I see Michelle seconding. Elaine has lowered her hand. And so unless there are any objections, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.